Well, hey everyone, welcome to my December book roundup. These are my short reviews of everything I read in December. 8 books in total. As always, I will put reviews and group them together by genre below and put my book of the month last. I'm going to start with a classic. Actually, a classic short fiction collection of sorts, and that is A Christmas Carol and Other Novels by Charles Dickens. This is actually 5 different novellas. These are the Easton Press editions of Dickens' work that I've been collecting, and I thought it'd be nice to do a little seasonal read of A Christmas Carol and some of the other stories, and actually 2 of the other novellas in here actually have kind of Christmas tie-ins, and 2 others also have some supernatural beings or things in them that made it pretty interesting just to kind of see a couple parallels between a few of these stories. I really enjoyed this collection. It even made me think, well, maybe Dickens is a bit more consistent in the short form than the long form. I've read, I don't know, 9 Dickens novels, I think, up to this point, and there are 5 novellas here, so it's a big enough sample size. And it made me think about just the way that these stories originated. The novellas, basically, Dickens wrote the story and then published them after they were written, whereas with the novels he would get the contract for X amount of parts. You know, he would tell the story in 20 parts and then he would write the novel based on how many parts he had sold. So because of that, I think sometimes him and just a lot of his contemporaries at the time, there were just not always the most perfect length for the story that they were to tell because it was published in installments. Specifically, a lot of times I think 19th century novelists tend to be a little bit bloated because they had to fill X amount of parts because of their contract. But I really enjoyed this collection. My favorites in here were, of course, A Christmas Carol. This was a reread. I had read this a long time ago. But some of the other stories in here I really enjoyed. The entire collection, because I know Dickens books are collected in a lot of different manners, but the 5 stories in here are A Christmas Carol, The Haunted Man, that one was a favorite, The Cricket on the Hearth, The Battle of Life, and then The Chimes was another favorite of mine. In fact, The Chimes is one that Dickens considered greater than A Christmas Carol. So I don't know how all those are published because there's so many different publications, but I would definitely seek out those novellas because I think they were very strong from Charles Dickens. So I do enjoy Dickens, but an author that's considered a classic author that is probably my favorite in that vein is John Steinbeck, and I read his debut, Cup of Gold. There's more to it. It's Cup of Gold, A Life of Sir Henry Morgan, Buccaneer, and occasional references to history as well. This is really Steinbeck's only true work of historical fiction. Many readers, myself included, have considered The Grapes of Wrath to be historical fiction, but that's really not true. It feels like historical fiction when you read it now, but he wrote it about a decade after the story was set, so it's really more contemporary fiction that just feels like historical fiction now. But The Cup of Gold is historical fiction. It's set in the 1700s, and it follows a British buccaneer, Captain Morgan. I think that's where the rum got their name, would be my guess. And it's told in 5 parts, and it tells kind of 5 different parts of Captain Morgan's history in this historical narrative. And it's pretty obvious this is a debut. I think of everything I've read by Steinbeck, I counted right before I turned the camera on. This is my 14th work of Steinbeck's that I've read. If I had to rank them, this would probably be number 14 for me. Specifically, his great skill at characterization isn't there yet in here. A lot of times Steinbeck's characters just jump off of the page at me, and I didn't feel that was the case here. A lot of times even his secondary characters that are barely in the story will have just mannerisms or quirks or just some colorful nature to them that makes them compelling, and I didn't feel that was the case. And to use the word compelling, I didn't feel the story itself was very compelling either. In fact, a couple of the vignettes, I just wondered why Steinbeck had chose those parts of this very colorful historical figure's story as to be parts that he told in there. So I don't regret reading it. The writing is still great. I mean, it's early Steinbeck, but it's still Steinbeck. So I really love the prose, and I could still recommend it, even if there's like 13 other works of Steinbeck that I've read that I would recommend before saying pick up Cup of Gold. Bark to the Future by Spencer Quinn. That's an audiobook that I listened to. This is crime fiction. This is crime noir of a type. You can tell by the title, Bark to the Future, that there's a dog in there, and that's the narrator. This is the latest installment of the Chet and Bernie mysteries by Spencer Quinn, and these are lighthearted murder mysteries, kind of mystery of the week type of storytelling, and I enjoy them, and I enjoy them most because of the narrative voice of Chet the dog, who is telling the story in a very crime noir type of style, but it's a dog, and all the mannerisms of a dog are just skillfully portrayed by Spencer Quinn in all of these books. The one thing I don't like about these books is a lot of them, the lesser installments, like this one, really rely on plot conveniences to tell the story. This one, it's a story where Bernie, who's the human in the Chet and Bernie mystery detective team, they meet a homeless man who went to high school with Bernie, and then when the man disappears, Bernie and Chet go to investigate what happened to him, and getting to the conclusion, there were several times where just very conveniently things happened and came together. So I don't always love that, but I love the narration of Chet the dog. It's very lighthearted, and when you read a lot of heavier things, or maybe sometimes I'm reading darker things and things that demand more of me as a reader, to just read these, or in the case of this one, listen to it, it's a nice change of pace for me. Jim Frangione is the audiobook narrator. As I did mention, I did listen to this on audio, and I will say, if you do listen to him as a narrator, he's great, but I think he's better in these books at 1.2 times rather than 1.0, because I think just a quicker delivery just captures the essence of Chet the dog. You know, most dogs have kind of attention deficit syndrome a little bit, and I think it helps just in those instances where the dog gets really distracted and things like that. The faster delivery works really well. But I enjoyed Bark to the Future. I'm not going to read any of these Chet and Bernie mysteries probably for a while, but I'll definitely come back to these when I need something lighthearted as a change of pace. Winter Warriors by David Gemmell is the latest book that I've read in the Drenai Saga. I think this is the 8th book published. There are 11 in the Drenai Saga, and there are 13 total in this world, because there are 2 prequels that he wrote as well. In many ways, though, this is 100% standalone, maybe the most standalone-ish of all the novels. The Drenai Saga bounces around chronologically, as well as bounces around the characters, and a lot of them do tie in, and they will reference previous books, but they do function very much as often standalones. Well, this one functions 100% as a standalone. I could say that you could pick this up and read this without having read anything else by Gemmell in this series, and you would be fine. Winter Warriors is a story that is basically about a transition of power where an emperor is going to step down, and the new emperor is going to take the reins, and one thing he's doing is he's retiring a lot of the old guard. And it's about 3 winter warriors. It's not just the winter season, but winter of their lives. 3 warriors that are being retired, and they don't really know what they're going to do with their lives. And I love the themes that come into play with that specifically. So I really enjoy that. But like most works of Gemmell, what happens is that you find that this story that seems very small in character focus is a lot bigger. And what we see is there's more at play with this transition of power from this old emperor to this new emperor. There's kind of some things behind the scenes that are making this a big global event. And perhaps these 3 grizzled warriors are the only people that can perhaps save the world as for what's going to go on. Really good story. It's typical heroic fantasy. It's dark fantasy. I mean, Gemmell doesn't mess around a lot of times. It's not grim dark, but it is dark at times. And it's well plotted, well paced. I mean, it's just a typical, consistently strong novel by David Gemmell in this Drenai Saga. Up next is a book that honestly is so much better than it ought to be. And that's Small Gods by Terry Pratchett. So this is a standalone in the Discworld universe, and it's about a kind of a monk, a priest in training who hears the voice of his god, and his god has come back in the form of a small turtle. And what you get in this novel is basically some of the deepest discussions on religion, but they're camouflaged by a fast-paced story that is humorous and is just this fantasy satire. But there's so much depth of discussion of religion in this story that you could do a really close reading. You could probably take notes, and you could probably write a paper about this book. And that's what I've seen. I've only read 2 by this author, but I'm so impressed by just the level of commentary from a social standpoint that is weaved into this story. Because this is a story where I think I mentioned on the Discord I was about 30 pages in and I already laughed out loud like 5 times. Pratchett's funny. He's really funny. But within, there's a deeper discussion upon theology and religion in here. It's so well done. It honestly shouldn't be as good as it is. I tip my hat to this author. I cannot wait to read more Discworld because I'm really impressed with how skillfully Pratchett's able to marry like some deep themes and some deep discussions with just satire and humor in a fast-paced narrative that's really lighthearted but has this depth. So Small Gods is fantastic. If you haven't read Discworld, I think this would be a great entry point. I'm not an expert. I've only read 2 books by Pratchett, but I will be continuing, hopefully later this year. The other book I read was Guards, so I hope to continue the City Watch series and kind of continue reading kind of sub-series of Discworld. But man, I was really impressed by Small Gods. Fantastic book by Sir Terry Pratchett. One Second After by William Fortschen is a post-apocalyptic story that has a really cool premise. Instead of a typical, here's the nuclear war, it's destroyed the world, we got a nuclear winter, we got all this radiation. This is a different kind of nuclear event. And this is a nuke that's exploded in the atmosphere that essentially just wipes out the power grid and wipes out every electronic item. So in one fell swoop, America is thrown into kind of an 18th century existence. So very, very cool premise. And the story itself was great. I really liked the inclusion of a lot of the characters that the author threw in there. And the ending was fantastic. It's one of those, you never know how a story like this is going to end. And I thought he ended it superbly. I had a lot of problems with the book, though. In general, the author in this book did a lot of telling and not showing. There were so many scenes of people sitting around a table and just exposition dump after exposition dump about how this might have happened, how it happened, now here's what we're going to do. And it got really, really tedious, all of these different scenes like that. That was tough. And then the other thing is, I'm a reader that I don't like when authors just take a theme or an idea and just pound it into me and beat me over the head with it. And if I had $1 for every character that said, "Oh, we were so arrogant and so reliant upon our electronics," I just kept rolling my eyes and at times just wanted to throw the Kindle across the room. But so that was a shame because I thought there's a really good story in here. And I think if you're not someone who doesn't mind when an author preaches to you or an author tells you what you're supposed to read or get out of the reading, it might be okay for you. I just don't feel I was the audience. I think that I want an author to trust me more, and this author didn't trust me. Now, I'm going to do a little political dig here. I saw that this was talked about on the floor of Congress, so I'm sure the average congressman maybe is not astute enough to not have his themes beat over the head with him. So maybe his audience was someone like that who's not a big reader, who needs, heavy-handedness, ham-handed thematic. Anyway, I digress. It's a good book. I think for a different reader, they may get a lot more out of it, but for me, it was just too obvious and too beat me over the head too much with the themes for me to make this a favorite. So I don't really think I can recommend to most of my audience 1 Second After by William Fortschen. So I finished The Sun Eater last month, and that is the 7th book, was Shadows Upon Time. This is the big sci-fi opera series that I've been reading the last year and about 3 months. I read all 7 novels, the 3 novellas, the 4 short story collections, and got to the end of the journey, and I'm very satisfied with the ending of this series. And Ruocchio had a tough job to get there because he tells you in book 1, chapter 1, hey, here's what's going to happen. And you have this narrative that spans 7 books, and Ruocchio had to somehow make the ending satisfying. He had to make it climactic while you, as a reader, knowing what was going to happen, basically. And he still made it suspenseful. I thought he still just did a great job in landing the ending of this series. Of the 7 books, I would probably put this as my third favorite of the 7. Despite a little bit of bloat, despite a couple aspects of it that I think were not great. I mean, he retconned a couple things, but overall, I thought he did a great job just sticking the landing in this series. This is a series that was just so sprawling and had so much thrown into it, and I think the biggest compliment I can ever give a book series is that I want to reread it. And this is one I do want to reread because I think there's a lot of depth in there, in the world building and a lot of the themes and a lot of the things that frankly I might not have gotten the first time around, because there's such an intricate kind of world building in these 7 books that I'm sure I didn't catch everything, and I look forward to rereading. But 2 things I've heard as criticisms for this book that I liked. One is there's a criticism, there's a big, heavy reliance upon kind of religious themes in this book, and part of it being that Hadrian has gone through a transformation and he feels different in this book. I'm okay with that because people change. I saw one reviewer complaining that it was kind of following Ruocchio's own personal spiritual journey over the time where he wrote the books. Well, if an author can go through a spiritual journey in a decade, I mean, this is a character who spans centuries. Surely he can change, the things that he believes and his personal philosophies and who he is. So I had no problems with any of that thematically in the story. The other thing that I was surprised people didn't like, because I loved it, is I love the way that Ruocchio started this book. The first 250 to 300 pages is basically telling you the aftermath, how the last book ended and we got to where we are in this book. And there's a lot of action sequences and things like that. And that's been, frankly, I think, a weakness or an area of growth for Ruocchio, as I've always felt that his action sequences went on too long and they were a bit unclear. Well, the way that he changed up the narrative at the beginning of this book, I think, fixed that. And I think that the beginning of the book was very compelling, and I was drawn in right away. I read it on my Kindle, and it said it was like 1,300 pages. So I would check the page count when I would finish, each evening or afternoon whenever I was reading. And I think that had he not changed up the narrative at the beginning, I might not have been 300 pages in and be like, yeah, where are we going? I might have been a little nervous about the overall length of this story. But I like the way that it began. I like the way that it ended. I felt very satisfied that the entire journey was worth it, and it's a journey that I'll definitely be embarking upon at some point again in the future. So my book of the month is The Death and Life of Bobby Z by Don Winslow. This really took me by surprise. I read this basically on a flight. Well, 2 flights. So there was a little stop in Minneapolis in between. I waved to Brian from Belltube because he was in Minneapolis, or lives in Minneapolis. But anyway, this was my book of the month, and this blew me away because this is a debut. And the thing that blew me away is Winslow makes it look easy. This is written in a very crime fiction stylized type of prose style with punchy dialogue and short sentences and paragraphs and short chapters. And I marvel at authors that do one of 2 things. One is I marvel at the authors that just simply write sentences that I could never construct in my entire lifetime. Like I read a Guy Gavriel K paragraph, and I think, like, you could give me a year and I couldn't write that paragraph. And then I marvel at the other side of it, that Winslow in this book, the short, simple, stylized prose, you read it and you think, oh, I can do that. And then you realize you can't, because there's so many other authors out there that I've read that have tried to do and tried to write in that writing style and have failed miserably, and I know that I would as well if I ever tried. The writing style in this is just superb, and that's one of the reasons I love this. But even beyond that, this is the story. You see the death and life, kind of an interesting title here. The title character is not Bobby Z. The title character is a guy named Tim, who's a convict. And the authorities want to enlist him to impersonate Bobby Z. And Bobby Z has died, and he looks just like Bobby Z, but not many people know who Bobby Z is, so he thinks he can impersonate him in order to bring down a big drug kingpin. And the story is fast and it's punchy. It goes a lot of different directions you won't expect. And in fact, the last 40 pages, there are like 3 plot turns that were like, whoa, like so jarring, but not unrealistic, which is something that I always crave for in this genre. Is I enjoy realism. I don't like the plot turn just for the sake of plot turn, but plot turn for, oh, that was cool. And there were like 3 of those at the end. But man, Don Winslow is killing me. This is the 6th book of his that I've read, and he is 6 for 6 for me. I'm buddy reading some Don Winslow next year with StoryTube. I can't wait to read that with Carlos. Yolanda's already read everything by Don Winslow, but Carlos and I are going to read the Dawn Patrol duology. And he has a book out next year I can't wait to read. I'm going to be just delving even deeper into this author because I'm really impressed. Well, my book of the month for December 2025 is The Death and Life of Bobby Z by Don Winslow. So, hey, that was my month. I'd love to hear what your best book was in December. How did you close out the year? Did you close out strong like I did? I hope that you did as well. And if you've read any of these, I'd love to talk with you in the comments section below. Just please label any spoilers for anybody that might want to know a little bit more about these books. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Twitter, Goodreads, and the Fireside Discord. I'd love to interact with you there. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.